Culver Center would like to welcome Robert Mann from Louisiana State University. He is an esteemed journalist and political historian who holds the Manship Chair at Manship School of Mass Communication at Louisiana State University. Professor Mann is also the director of Riley Center for Media and Public Affairs. Prior to joining the LSU faculty in 2006, Mann spent more than 20 years in the political arena, working for 3 United States senators and Louisiana governor. As an acclaimed author, he has written on a variety of political history subjects and has appeared on national programs such as MSNBC, CBS, and ABC. His most recent book is Daisy Petals and Mushroom Clouds, LBJ, Mary Goldwater, and the Ad That Changed American Politics. The topic couldn't be more timely as we are bombarded with new rounds of ads every few days in the 2012 election. Will everyone please help me welcome Professor Robert Mann.
Thank you, Tom, for that, and thank you to Mary and the Culver Center for their hospitality and the honor of inviting me to come here and be with you and meet your wonderful students and other people associated with this fine college. I've known Mary for several years through our affiliation with the Institute of Politics at Harvard, and we bring students up there. Some of the students who have been up there are with us tonight, and I have been to Iowa several times in the last few years, most recently in January when I brought up about 24 of my students from LSU the week before the Iowa caucuses, and we went all over and met every one of the presidential candidates and had a really wonderful time and enjoyed some of your Iowa hospitality. So when Mary asked me to come back, I jumped at the chance to come back to this wonderful state that I've learned to love. So thank you for being here tonight, and I hope you'll enjoy some of the spots I'm going to show you. I think that for most of you, some of these will be new, some of them will be ones that you've probably seen ad nauseum in the last few months, but we're going to talk about them and maybe look at them in a little bit different way, in a different light. 43 years ago, shortly after the election of Richard Nixon, there was a journalist, Joe McGinnis, who published this remarkable story that I use in my classes still, called The Selling of the President. And I highly recommend this book if you want to learn about modern campaigning and the development of modern campaigning. But in this book, McGinnis was not just critiquing the political system in the United States, he was critiquing really the American voter. And he wrote that politics, in a sense, has always been a con game. The American voter, insisting on his belief in a higher order, clings to his religion, which promises another, better life, and defends passionately the illusion that the men he chooses to lead him are of finer nature than he. And illusion was a big theme in the McGinnis story, and it's what quickly led him to the subject of political advertising, or advertising in general, political advertising in particular, which he believed was quite a con game. He wrote that it's not surprising then that politicians and advertising men should have discovered one another. And once they recognized that the citizen did not so much vote for a candidate as make a psychological purchase of him, not surprising that they began working together. And the voter, McGinnis believed, was hardly an unwitting victim in this con game. And then McGinnis quoted from this book by Daniel Borston, the former Librarian of Congress, who wrote this wonderful book, The Image. And in that book, Borston writes that the problems of advertising come less from the unscrupulousness of our deceivers than from our pleasure in being deceived, less from the desire to seduce than from the desire to be seduced. And he believed that advertising had reshaped our very concept of truth. And then there was a book a few years later that picked up this theme from Borston, the wonderful book by Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death. And Postman wrote that the television commercial, not just political commercials, but the product television commercial had made a hash, he called it a hash, of capitalism. And he wrote, by substituting images for claims, the pictorial commercial has made emotional appeal, not tests of truth, the basis of consumer decisions. What the advertiser needs to know is not what is right about the product, but what is wrong about the buyer. And then Postman ventures into political advertising, which he thought, the statement I just read for you, applied to politics. And he said, on television, the politician does not so much offer the audience an image of himself as offer himself as an image of the audience. And so it is today, I think, that political advertisers continue working to strike what the famous ad man Tony Schwartz called the responsive chord. It wasn't always so. And when it dawned on political advertisers to play to the emotions of their audiences, to go for fear or anger or derision, that change came very quickly. And it hit American politics like a bolt of lightning in the presidential election of 1964. In fact, it was just over 48 years ago, on the night of September 7th, 1964, that this innocent little girl right here, I'm going to show you the spot in a little bit, that this innocent little girl transformed the way that political advertising is done in America, in a 60-second spot that exploded, literally and figuratively, the way that American politicians sold themselves to the public. For years, this guy here, Barry Goldwater, Republican senator from Arizona, had spoken pretty recklessly about nuclear power, nuclear war, the testing of nuclear bombs. He joked about, after Kennedy announced that we were going to send a man to the moon, Goldwater joked, I'm not interested in sending a missile to the moon. I want to lob one into the men's room in the Kremlin. And he suggested using nuclear weapons to defoliate the forests of South Vietnam to help win the war over there. And he said the bomb was just merely another weapon. He wanted to give the NATO commanders in Western Europe the authority on their own, without checking with the White House first, to use nuclear weapons if they thought the need arose. And so to anyone, I mean, I'm not talking about in just people who paid close attention to politics, but the American people generally knew that this was a guy who was speaking fairly recklessly about politics, and to anyone with eyes to see, they knew that Goldwater was pretty ripe for attacks when he became the Republican nominee for president in 1964. And so those attacks from Lyndon Johnson in that election, most of them based on Goldwater's reckless statements about a variety of issues, not just nuclear war or nuclear weapons, introduced into our politics this radically new way of communicating with voters. This was the first presidential campaign to use emotional appeals. In particular, it was the emotion of fear, but it was still injecting emotion, going for emotion. Even more specifically, it was fear of nuclear annihilation. And it was also the first time that spots in a presidential campaign relied very heavily on story, on narrative. It was the first campaign in which many of the spots did not contain specific facts or figures, but relied almost entirely on information that the voters already had in their minds. In other words, the spots tried to generate an emotional response, or strike what Tony Schwartz called the responsive chord, using existing knowledge, not educating the voter, but using what they already had in their minds. They were the first spots to use the creative advertising principles of Madison Avenue. It seems remarkable to me that it took political advertisers that long to figure it out, but it was the first time that they thought about advertising like Madison Avenue did. And they were the first spots designed to maximize exposure by earning news media attention for the spots that they were running. I'm going to show you those spots in a minute, but to demonstrate what a revolutionary campaign this was, I think it's best to look back before that, the state of political advertising and presidential campaigns in the 1950s and early 60s. And so I'm going to show you some spots in a few minutes. But before I show you the spots that were produced for Dwight Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson, Richard Nixon, John F. Kennedy, it's worth noting that there was a creative revolution going on in product advertising that was sweeping the country in the 1950s, particularly in the late 1950s and early 60s, that hadn't yet reached politics. And the political spots that I'm about to show you are decidedly uncreative. They don't employ really any of the strategies and techniques that Madison Avenue was using to sell soap and soup and automobiles. These political spots that I'm going to show you contain very rational, fact-based appeals. They're almost sort of mini speeches. And in fact, most of the advertising that was done in the 50s and 60s by politicians were not spot advertising. They were 15 and 30-minute speeches, just delivered looking into the camera. So let me show you what I mean. First, we're going to look at a few of the Eisenhower spots from 1952. Now, they're creative in a way because they're spot advertising, which is creative in that sense, sort of technically creative. And Eisenhower, unlike most candidates at that period, did use spot advertising fairly extensively, which was unusual. But we're going to look at a few of the Eisenhower spots.
Eisenhower answers America.
They say we've never had it so good. Yet I've had to stop buying eggs. They're so expensive.
No wonder. You actually pay 100 different taxes on just one egg. We must cut costs, which means we must cut taxes. Eisenhower answers America.
General, how would you clean up the mess in Washington?
My answer? It's not a one-agency mess, or even a one-department mess. It's a top-to-bottom mess. And I promise we will clean it up from top to bottom. Eisenhower answers America.
Can you cut taxes, Mr. Eisenhower?
We can and will, if you help. Taxes have gone up steadily for 15 years. The Democrats say they're going to go up still more. Help me put the lid on crazy government spending.
Okay, that was, there's a fascinating story about that, but I'll just tell you this, that during a break, Eisenhower hated doing these spots. And during a break, this was all done in New York, and he muttered to an aide to think an old general should come to this. Because he just thought it was the most degrading thing to have to go through advertising himself like soap or cereal. Okay, this is to me the coolest spot of the era. It was produced by the Eisenhower campaign. They actually went to Disney, to the animators at Disney, and got Disney to do it. So this is the first and maybe only political spot that Disney ever did.
I'm for president, I'm for president, I'm for president, I'm for president. You like I like I. Everybody likes I for president. I got the banner, beat the drum. We'll take back to Washington. We don't want John or D or Harry. Let's give that big job right. Let's get in step with the guy that's set. Get in step with I. You like I like I. Everybody likes I for president. I got the banner, beat the drum. We'll take back to Washington. We got to get where we are going. Travel day and night for president. Let Adelaide go beyond the way. We'll all go with I. You like I like I. Everybody likes I for president. They got the banner, beat the drum. We'll take back to Washington. We'll take back to Washington. Now is the time for all good Americans to come to the aid of their country.
So I showed this spot, I did a presentation that C-SPAN aired, and some guy from California called me and deconstructed the spot in ways that it blew me away. There were so many subliminal messages in there. Some of them I had noticed, but a lot more than I ever had. And if anybody wants to talk about them after it's over, I'll share with you what I think are the similarities between this spot and the spot I'm going to show you later, which is Reagan's Morning in America, and why I think both spots are actually very clever negative spots. Okay, so that year Eisenhower was running against Adlai Stevenson, the Democratic nominee, governor of Illinois, and these are a couple of the spots that Stevenson ran that year.
I'm excited about voting for Governor Stevenson for president. I think he is a new kind of man in American politics. He will be a president for all the people. Stevenson has told the Texans and the people of Louisiana and California that Thailand oil belongs not to them alone, but to all of the people of the country. In the South, he has made a strong statement for civil liberty and full equality. The farmer, the businessman, the veteran, and the working man. To each in turn, he has said that he will represent not their interest alone, but the interests of all of us. That's why I am excited about Governor Stevenson. He will be a president for all the people.
Her excitement is infectious. Wouldn't you just stop whatever you're doing and watch that? I mean, that's just, I love that spot. That's, okay. This is not much better, but that spot is very typical of the kind of advertising that was done in that period. Just looking at the camera, somebody talking, and just very rational appeal, very boring, nothing interesting about it at all. No effort to really engage the viewer. This gets an A for effort at least.
Step right up, folks. See the mental marvel of the campaign, Mr. GOP. He promises to solve all your problems. Ask him any questions.
What about Korea?
We don't belong in Korea. Let the communists have it.
We can expand more. Open a second front in China. Wait a minute. We can't do both. We can't pull our troops out of Korea and invade China.
Go away, lady. You bother me. Any more questions? What about aid to Europe? I'll personally tear down the Iron Curtain.
Not another nickel down that rat hole. Let the commies have.
That's double talk. What are you complaining about? You get two promises for the price of one.
Stop confusing the issue. I want a straight answer. Should we support the United Nations or not?
Yes. I mean no.
No, I mean yes.
You're confused.
You're confused.
Don't you be confused. Vote for Stevenson.
Okay, so now we're going to fast forward a little bit to 1960 because, let's face it, there really wasn't an election in 1956. It was a repeat, and the spots were just awful. But I want to. This is now 8 years later from when the first spot in the presidential campaign was run, and I want you to notice how little advanced these were. How creatively and technically they didn't advance much. They're pretty much stuck in time. This is a spot that was aired by John F. Kennedy in 1960.
This is the Sills family. Recently, John F. Kennedy visited the Sills.
Mr. and Mrs. Sills are facing one of the great problems that all American families are now facing. And that is the great increase in the cost of living.
Our rent has gone up, our food, our cleaning of our clothing, buying of the clothing, our gas and electric, and our telephone bills have gone up.
What's been your experience, Mr. Sills? Well, keeping those two daughters of yours.
Well, I'm very concerned with their future. We would like both of them to go to college.
Have you been able to put much aside with your little one?
Unfortunately, not right now.
One of the things which I think has increased the cost of living has been this administration's reliance upon a high-interest rate policy. My own judgment is that we're going to have to try to do a better job in this field.
Yes, we can do better. But to do so, we must elect a man who cares about America's problems. We must elect John F. Kennedy president.
Okay, and then here's Richard Nixon. Very, very much rational, fact-based, not emotional, a little short speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States, Richard M. Nixon. I want to talk to you for a moment about civil rights, equal rights for all our citizens. Why must we vigorously defend them? First, because it is right and just. And second, because we cannot compete successfully with communism if we fail to utilize completely the minds and energies of all of our citizens. And third, the whole world is watching us. When we fail to grant equality to all, that makes news, bad news for America all over the world. Now the record shows there's been more progress in civil rights in the past 8 years than in the preceding 80 years, because this administration has insisted on making progress. And I want to continue and speed up that progress. I want to help build a better America for all Americans.
Okay, now we're gonna zoom ahead 4 more years. We're gonna look at what Barry Goldwater was running against Lyndon Johnson in 1964. And again, I think you're gonna see that from 1952 to 1964, political advertising doesn't advance that much.
Is moral responsibility our style? Our papers and our newsreels, and yes, our own observations tell us that immorality surrounds us as never before. We see violence in the streets, in our cities, in suburbs, graft and corruption in the highest public offices to which we look for leadership, when scandal in local and national government has become so commonplace that many begin to consider it a way of life. Then I say that we, as a nation, are not far from the kind of moral decay that has brought on the fall of other nations and people. The philosophy of something for nothing, the cult of individual and government irresponsibility, is an insidious cancer that will destroy us as a people
unless we recognize it and root it out now. I say it is time to put conscience back in government, and by good example, put it back in all walks of American life. In your heart, you know he's right. Vote for Barry Goldwater.
So I always tell my students that be careful if you ever go to politics with their slogan, because what Johnson did with that slogan, in your heart, you know he's right, they said, in your guts, you know he's nuts. And then they came up with, in your heart, you know he might. So I always tell my students, play around with your slogan, because it can be turned around on you. Okay, now we're going to talk about the 1964 race on the Democratic side, which revolutionized American politics. But first, just a little more background about the creative revolution that was sweeping across Madison Avenue. And leading that revolution in advertising was a firm called Doyle, Dane, Bernbach. It's now known as DDB. And it was run by a guy named Bill Bernbach, who was the creative genius of the firm, one of the most famous ad men in advertising, American advertising history, who was famous for telling his employees, rules are made to be broken. Other times he told them something like, playing it safe can be the most dangerous thing in the world because you're presenting people with an idea they've seen before and it won't have impact. He was talking about a lot of what we just saw before. Bernbach hated the hard sell techniques of Rosser Reeves, who's the guy that did those Eisenhower Answers America spots. He would say, make sure your advertising is saying something with substance, something that will serve and inform the consumer, and be sure you're saying it like it's never been said before. And it might not surprise you then that at DDB, research was not a really high priority. Here's Bernbach from an interview in the 70s. This is what he said about research in advertising.
The human being is created by nature, and there's a certain instinct we have, which really dominates. And unless we understand it, if we proceed purely on an intellectual basis, we're not going to get very far. There was a pretty intelligent salesman by the name of Aristotle a long time ago who said that you don't persuade people through the intellect, you do it through the passions. Now it's up to the man who's doing the persuading to tap those passions for good moral purposes. But certainly, that's what does it. I think it was a Conrad who said, you can have all the precise words in the world. Just give me the words like glory and honor and all the words of emotion and inspiration.
I don't think anything represents the revolution that was going on in the late 50s in advertising more vividly than automobile advertising. And this is all going to make sense in a minute. Automobile advertising was really mediocre, bland, conventional. These automobile advertisements were among, I think, representative of the worst in advertising, especially in print advertising. For decades, Detroit had been showing us illustrations, not photographs, very rarely photographs, in which the hands of an artistic elongator made the car look longer and exaggerated its proportions. The cars didn't actually look like that in real life. So DDB got the Volkswagen account. And this is the car that Hitler built, that Hitler ordered. This was Hitler's car, and they were going to sell it in the United States fairly less than 20 years, 15 years after the end of the war. And those Volkswagens weren't selling too well. And DDB opted not for these kind of ads, but came up with something very new and fresh in product advertising, print advertising, and in television advertising. The first ad that they came up with for Volkswagen was this right here, a photograph of the car, of the Beetle. And it became a symbol for the ads, the dozens of ads that followed for Volkswagen by DDB. A small photograph of a Beetle in the upper corner, with a lot of white space at the bottom over several paragraphs of text. This one said, "Think small, Advertising Age declared this the most successful advertising campaign of the 20th century." This is another one, the lemon ad, very famous in advertising history. Kind of an arresting, unprecedented advertising approach, especially for an automobile. So over this Large picture of this Beetle, simple headline, lemon. And the text is talking about the company's meticulous inspection regimen. It says, this Volkswagen missed the boat. The chrome on the glove compartment is blemished and must be replaced. Chances are you wouldn't have noticed it. Inspector Kirk Kroner did. We pluck the lemons, you get the plums. It was unheard of for a company to make fun of its product, but also feature its mistakes. These were fresh, they were honest, and the subsequent television commercials that DDB produced for this German company were enormously popular and were part of the reason that within just a few years, sales of Volkswagens went from about 190,000 in 1960 to 570,000 in 1968. Exploded sales of Volkswagens. And these ads caught the eye of a very important man in the United States. His name was John F. Kennedy. He'd been elected president, and he was watching television, reading magazines, and seeing these fresh new ads, the kind of advertising that no one had seen before. And he took notice of them. And I'm going to show you a couple of the Volkswagen ads that were on television those times, and you'll see what I mean.
Have you ever wondered how the man who drives a snowplow drives to the snowplow? This one drives a Volkswagen. So you can stop wondering.
All right, here's another one that ran about that time.
Believe it or not, we have over a mile of inspectors at the Volkswagen factory. More than 7,000 men who have only one job, to keep an eye on the way Volkswagens are made. And there's no nonsense about them. They reject the Volkswagen, or kind of a Volkswagen, for little things you might never even see. And when one of our inspectors says no, it's no. That's why you'll never find so much as a blob of paint or a stitch on a place on the new Volkswagen. An inspector finds it first. Frankly, not every car we make makes it. But any car that gets to the end of that long line of inspectors is a Volkswagen.
So Kennedy sees these ads, and he tells his brother-in-law, Steve Smith, find this ad firm. I want them to do spots for me when I run for re-election in 1964. And of course, Kennedy dies, and Lyndon Johnson becomes president, and the Democratic National Committee continues its conversations with DDB. And finally, after some debate, they decide to hire Doyle Dane Bernbach to do their ads for the coming campaign. And that is probably the most momentous decision made in the history of political advertising, because it changes the face of political advertising. So, in what would become known simply as the Daisy Girl spot, produced by DDB, it was the first spot aired in the presidential campaign by the Democrats in 1964, aired on the night of September 7th, 1964, at about 9:50 p.m. on the East Coast, in the middle of David and Bathsheba, which was the Monday night at the movies. It was the most popular show in America at that time. 50 million people, very stunned people, were watching this spot.
each other, or we must die.
President Johnson, on November 3rd, the stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Okay, so Goldwater's people were just outraged by this spot. But there's only one problem with their outrage, and that is that Goldwater is not mentioned in the spot. His name's not there, his picture's not there, there's no reference to Goldwater. Everything about Goldwater was in the minds of the viewers, not in the spot itself. Goldwater's people very helpfully said, you've said all these nasty things about us, but the truth is that Goldwater was not in the spot. The Johnson people didn't need to. Goldwater had said all these reckless things and had branded himself indelibly as a dangerous extremist. In fact, if you know your political history, you know that when he went to the convention, he said he embraced the label of extremist in his acceptance speech. Johnson didn't need to spell out what voters already knew. And so in the weeks to follow, there was this 1, 2, 3, 4 punch on Goldwater. So the following Monday, I can't remember what the movie was, the following Monday, same time, in the midst of Monday night, the movies, 50 million people are watching, the Johnson campaign comes back with this punch. I didn't remember, the Daisy Girl spot never aired again. They aired it one time and never showed it again. They aired this one time, never showed it again.
Do you know what people used to do? They used to explode atomic bombs in the air. Now, children should have lots of vitamin A and calcium, but they shouldn't have any strontium-90 or cesium-137. These things come from atomic bombs, and they're radioactive. They can make you die. Do you know what people finally did? They got together and signed a nuclear test ban treaty, and then the radioactive poison started to go away. But now, there's a man who wants to be President of the United States, and he doesn't like this treaty. He fought against it. He even voted against it. He wants to go on testing more bombs. His name is Barry Goldwater. And if he's elected, they might start testing all over again.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Okay, we're going to look at a couple more spots that kept pounding Goldwater on this issue.
On October 24th, 1963, Barry Goldwater said of the nuclear bomb, merely another weapon. Merely another weapon. Vote for President Johnson. The stakes are too high for you to stay home. This particular phone only reigns in a serious crisis. Keep it in the hands of a man who's proven himself responsible. Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
Nuclear weapons weren't the only thing they were pounding Goldwater on. He had made some reckless remarks about sawing off the eastern seaboard, sort of equivalent to what Romney said about the 47%. This is sort of Goldwater's 47% remark and what Johnson people did with it.
In a Saturday Evening Post article dated August 31st, 1963, Barry Goldwater said, "Sometimes I think this country would be better off if we could just saw off the eastern seaboard and let it float out to sea." Can a man who makes statements like this be expected to serve all people justly and fairly? Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
So notice there, in all these spots, minimum amount of information, but very high on concept and very rich on memorable images. All right, so it was also, Goldwater also made some remarks about the Social Security system being voluntary. And this, again, a very profound, memorable image that the Johnson people came up with to drive home that Goldwater wanted to undo or radically change Social Security.
On at least 7 occasions, Senator Barry Goldwater said that he would change the present Social Security system. But even his running mate, William Miller, admits that Senator Goldwater's voluntary plan would destroy your Social Security. President Johnson is working to strengthen Social Security. Vote for him on November 3rd.
So, as I mentioned earlier, the Daisy Girl spot and all these other spots, there were 27 of them in total that aired during that campaign, were the first spots to use creative advertising principles in a presidential campaign. They were the first in a political era in which presidential candidates increasingly used emotion, not reason, to win elections. This spot and the other spots like it were skillfully manipulating the fears that were residing in voters' minds, and they showed a new generation of advertisers how to do it. That it was far more than just about giving information and who had the best facts. It was instead about which candidate could give meaning to the facts and fears that the voters already had. And I think that the DNA of these spots is in a lot of our political advertising today. And I'm going to show you a few spots, most of them negative, ranging from 1968 all the way through this election. And I think almost all of them represent something important that DDB created in 1964. So the first one is a spot from Richard Nixon in 1968. It's perhaps the first negative spot that went too far and had to be pulled back, pulled off the air because it backfired. It was suggesting that Hubert Humphrey was celebrating the carnage in Vietnam. A little too high concept for a lot of people. So Humphrey's campaign came back with something much more reminiscent of Daisy Girl against Nixon, and this is what it was.
Do you want Castro to have the bomb now? Do you want any country that doesn't have the bomb to be able to get it? Of course you don't. Where does Richard Nixon stand on the UN treaty to stop the spread of nuclear weapons? He says he's in no hurry to pass it. Hubert Humphrey wants to stop the spread of nuclear weapons now, before it mushrooms. Hubert Humphrey supports the UN treaty now, as do the 80 countries who have already signed it. Let's stop the spread of the bomb now.
There wasn't a lot of...
There is no alternative.
There wasn't a lot of humor in political advertising up to this point. We saw a little bit of it in the '64 campaign. This is one of the first attempts at outright humor or ridicule in a presidential campaign. Humphrey against Nixon. Okay, so now we're gonna jump ahead to 1984 and Ronald Reagan's campaign, which I think also is interesting because Reagan brought in Madison Avenue advertising people to do his campaign, and he produced a couple of spots that are really considered among the best ever. One of them is called the Bear spot. It's not a hard negative, but I think it's a great example of the use of parable, and I think that Daisy Girl spot is in the same vein. It demonstrates, like Daisy, how the existing images and narratives in people's minds, the stories, what they already know, can be put to use. In this case, it's about the notion that the Democrats are weak when it comes to national security, can't stand up to the Soviet Union. But this spot does not require giving the viewer, the voter, a lot of information.
There's a bear in the woods. For some people, the bear is easy to see. Others don't see it at all. Some people say the bear is tame. Others say it's vicious and dangerous. Since no one can really be sure who's right, isn't it smart to be as strong as the bear? If there is a bear.
So in that same election, the Reagan campaign aired the famous Morning in America spot that so many people know about, which I think really struck a responsive chord with voters. It used information and emotions they already had about the improved economy after several years of pretty bad depression or recession. And if you want to discuss it later, I'll tell you why I think this spot is really a very clever negative spot.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
Okay, the next spot is from 1988, and it's the famous Willie Horton spot that some of you have seen or heard of. It was aired by a third-party organization supporting George H.W. Bush against Michael Dukakis, and it's a good example of using an existing narrative about a candidate and putting that to use. It's also a demonstration that ads, like the Daisy Girl spot, which aired in its entirety on the TV the network news broadcast later that week in 1964. It's an example of how you can create synergism in which the ad and the news about the ad and about the issue meld together into sort of one large narrative that's greater than the sum of its parts. So we're going to look at that spot. We're going to also see the official campaign spot that the Bush campaign ran after the more blatant race-baiting spot that preceded it.
Bush and Dukakis on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
Of course, these spots are also pretty heavy on fear. Here's the official Bush spot that took off on that.
As Governor Michael Dukakis vetoed mandatory sentences for drug dealers, he vetoed the death penalty. His revolving door prison policy gave weekend furloughs to first-degree murderers not eligible for parole. While out, many committed other crimes like kidnapping and rape, and many are still at large. Now Michael Dukakis says he wants to do for America what he's done for Massachusetts. America can't afford that risk.
The next spot is from '92, a Bill Clinton spot, which I think is the best use of narrative, the best use of story in any television spot in the presidential campaign.
I was born in a little town called Hope, Arkansas, 3 months after my father died. I remember that old 2-story house where I lived with my grandparents. They had very limited incomes. It was in 1963 that I went to Washington and met President Kennedy at the Boys Nation program. And I remember just thinking what an incredible country this was, that somebody like me, had no money or anything, would be given the opportunity to meet the president. That's when I decided I could really do public service because I cared so much about people. I worked my way through law school and part-time jobs, anything I could find. After I graduated, I really didn't care about making a lot of money. I just wanted to go home and see if I could make a difference. We've worked hard in education and healthcare, and creating jobs, and we've made real progress. Now it's exhilarating to me to think that as president, I could help to change all our people's lives for the better and bring hope back to the American dream.
Okay, now to 2004, and one of the famous Swift boat ads that was aimed at John Kerry's Vietnam War record. These were originally shown on cable, very small ad buy, but it's a great example how advertisers learn to use negative advertising to create news, something that DDB did in '64 with great effect with the Daisy Girl spot.
They had personally raped, cut off ears, cut off heads.
The accusations that John Kerry made against the veterans who served in Vietnam was just devastating.
Randomly shot at civilians.
And it hurt me more than any physical wounds I had.
Cut off limbs, blown up bodies.
That was part of the torture, was to sign a statement that you had committed war crimes.
Razed villages in fashion reminiscent of Genghis Khan.
John Kerry gave the enemy for free what I and many of my comrades in North Vietnam, in the prison camps, took torture to avoid saying. It demoralized us.
Crimes committed on a day-to-day basis.
He betrayed us in the past. How could we be loyal to him now?
Ravaged the countryside of South Vietnam.
He dishonored his country and, more importantly, the people he served with. He just sold them out.
Swift Boat Veterans for Truth is responsible for the content of this advertisement.
Okay, here's a spot from the last, the 2004 election. I think it's another very effective parable spot. It's made by Mark McKinnon for George W. Bush. Mark was at the school just last week, and he told me that the bear spot was the inspiration for this one.
In an increasingly dangerous world, even after the first terrorist attack on America, John Kerry and the liberals in Congress voted to slash America's intelligence operations by $6 billion. Cuts so deep they would have weakened America's defenses. And weakness attracts those who are waiting to do America harm.
Okay, here is another use of story, very effective use of story. No, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. This is a spot from 2008 by Obama, and using McCain's comments, past comments about the economy against him. A very effective spot in the spirit of the DDB spots in which Johnson was using Goldwater's statements against him about nuclear war and Social Security.
Our economy, I think, still, fundamentals of our economy are strong. The fundamentals of our economy are strong. The fundamentals of our economy are strong.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
Okay, here's a McCain spot from that same race, which I think is another very effective use of narrative and story.
I've served my country since I was 17 years old and spent 5 years longing for her shores. I came home dedicated to a cause greater than my own. We can grow our economy. We will cut government waste. Don't hope for a stronger America. Vote for one. Join me. McCain. I'm John McCain, and I approve this message.
Okay, now I want to show some what I think are a lot more fun spots that hopefully might make you laugh. And some of them I'm sure you've seen. You were bombarded with some of these spots last time around. These spots, I think, show just how creative and funny candidates can be and still communicate their message. They're from a losing presidential candidate, Bill Richardson, in 2008. But it's produced by one of the more creative people in political advertising today, Mark Putnam. And I'll show you, the last spot I'll show you tonight is also a spot of his, but this is from the Richardson campaign in 2008. There's 2 spots.
Okay, 14 years in Congress, UN Ambassador, Secretary of Energy, Governor of New Mexico, negotiated with dictators in Iraq, North Korea, Cuba, Zaire, Nigeria, Yugoslavia, Kenya, got a ceasefire in Darfur, nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 4 times. So, what makes you think you can be president?
I'm Bill Richardson, and I approve this message.
Tell me what you did as governor in New Mexico.
Well, I used tax cuts to help create
over 80,000 jobs. Yeah, I saw that.
A lot of those jobs
are high tech, helps the middle class.
Up to 6 in the nation for job growth.
Balanced by budgets, put over $600 million in the classrooms, and cut school bureaucracy.
New Mexico was 46 in teacher pay. Now we're 29.
For what we're looking for, you might be a little overqualified.
I'm Bill Richardson, and I approve this message.
Okay, now we're coming to the current presidential race, which I think represents, here's a spot we're going to show you that I think represents some of the creative energy and imagination that is often lacking in presidential advertising. A lot of what we see today is fairly rote and formulaic, and I think the spots that Ron Paul ran here and elsewhere really stood out. Here's one that I particularly thought was creative and interesting and eye-catching.
What's up with these sorry politicians? Lots of mark. When it's showtime, when you like little shih tzus. You want big cuts. Ron Paul's been screaming it for years. Budget prices, no problem. Got $1 trillion year one. That's trillion with a T. Department of Education, gone. Interior, Energy, Health, Commerce, gone. Later bureaucrats. That's how Ron Paul rules. Want to drain the swamp? Ron Paul. Do it.
I'm Ron Paul. This message.
Anybody remember seeing that spot here? Okay, so here's a Romney spot from, or a Romney Super PAC spot from the primaries that I believe I saw this when I was here in January, early January, that plugs into the negative impressions that a lot of people had about Newt Gingrich when he was Speaker of the House.
You know what makes Barack Obama happy? Newt Gingrich's baggage. Newt has more baggage than the airlines. Freddie Mac helped cause the economic collapse, but Gingrich cashed in. Freddie Mac paid Newt $30,000 an hour, $1.6 million. Gingrich not only teamed up with Nancy Pelosi on global warming, but together they co-sponsored a bill that gave $60 million a year to a UN program supporting China's brutal one-child policy. As Speaker, Gingrich even supported taxpayer funding of some abortions. And Newt is the only speaker in history to be reprimanded. He was fined $300,000 for ethics violations by a Republican Congress. As Conservative National Review says, his weakness for half-baked and not especially conservative ideas made him a poor Speaker of the House. He appears unable to transform or even govern himself. Newt Gingrich, too much baggage. Restore Our Future is responsible for the content of this message.
Okay, I think that's good imagery, very memorable spot. All right, so here's just a couple more spots here. This is I think a very good spot to show. I tested this on my students at LSU, and you've probably seen it. They had not, because nobody airs presidential spots in Louisiana because we're not a swing state. But they thought it was very good and very effective, even my Republican students, most of whom are Republican. It's an Obama spot in the spirit of the anti-Goldwater spots of 1964, using Romney's words against him.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
There are 27% of the people who vote for the president who are dependent on government, who believe that they are victims, who believe the government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they're entitled to health care, to food, to housing, to anything, and they will vote for this president no matter what. And so my job is not to worry about those people. I'll never convince them. They should take personal responsibility to care for their lives.
Okay, so as I hope you can see from this quick review and just a smattering of spots, that the spirit of these Daisy Girl spots and the other spots in that campaign, that idea of story and parable and humor and using plugging into the emotions already lurking in the hearts of voters and bringing them to the surface is really something that lives on in our recently sophisticated presidential campaigns, advertising campaigns. This 1964 campaign introduced fear primarily into campaigns as a very powerful emotion in politics, and it showed in many ways that in the new era of political advertising that virtually anything was fair game. And as all of these spots demonstrate, I think I don't think it's an overstatement to say that much of the political world that we experience today was born in that presidential campaign of 1964. And emotion, especially fear as a tool of politicians and their advertising consultants, really is here to stay. All right, so I want to leave you with this final thought, and that is I wrote a piece in Politico with Sid Meier's, who was one of the creators of the Daisy Girl spot about three or 4 months ago, and we explored why it is that spots are so much formulaic spots, why politicians produce such drivel, why they don't want to create innovative, why they won't take risks, and politicians are pretty conservative people. And so we talked about that, and so I sort of challenged myself. All right, I'm going to find creative spots. I want to find people who are doing really cool, innovative stuff that's memorable, has memorable images, that engages people, that draws people in, that makes them think, not just completely using emotions, but uses emotional appeal, creative advertising to make people think and remember. More importantly, remember what they've seen and think about it after the spot is over. And I go back to Mark Putnam, who did the Richardson spots. Mark is working for Obama now. He's the guy that produced the 30-minute spot that aired on election eve in 2008, which was a masterful piece of political advertising. He works a lot of Senate and governor's races around the country. And in 2010, he represented John Hickenlooper, who's now the governor of California, who before that was he made beer. He was a beer maker. And he owned a brewery, a microbrewery. And this guy was campaigning against negative campaigning. And Mark helped him produce what I think is one of the funniest spots and a very memorable spot, images that will stay with you even if you see it one time. And so I'll leave you with this. Hopefully it'll leave you laughing.
I'm John Hickenlooper. I guess I'm not a very good politician, because I can't stand negative ads. Every time I see one, I feel like I need to take a shower. And you see a lot of them. With all the challenges we face, Colorado needs a governor who brings people together, and create jobs and cut government spending. That's why I won't run negative ads. Pitting one group against another, or one part of Colorado against another, doesn't help anyone. And besides, we need the water.
I suppose a lot of you feel like you need to take a shower after what you've been through in this state, seeing a lot of negative ads. So it's been a delight being with you. I hope that some of these spots have entertained you, and more importantly, I hope to make you become perhaps a little more sophisticated consumers of political advertising in the 30 or so days we have left. Thanks very much for coming out tonight.